Margaret Reynolds had always lived a quiet life in a small town in Ohio. At 60 years old, she had long accepted that motherhood was a chapter she would never get to experience. That was until the impossible happened. She was pregnant. News of her pregnancy spread like wildfire, but instead of congratulations, she was met with whispers, judgmental stares, and even outright rejection. Friends distanced themselves, her neighbors gossiped, and even her own family struggled to understand. They called it unnatural, irresponsible, even selfish. But Margaret held on to hope, believing that this child was meant to be. What no one expected, however, was how this story would unfold, and the incredible twist that would change everything. Margaret's days were filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The doctors warned her of the risks. Her age made the pregnancy high risk, and many doubted she would carry the baby to term. But Margaret was determined. She followed every medical recommendation, took each step carefully, and whispered words of love to the life growing inside her. Despite the loneliness, she found solace in small moments. The quiet hum of classical music playing in the background as she knitted tiny sweaters, the soft glow of the morning sun warming her kitchen as she prepared herbal tea. She refused to let fear or judgment break her spirit. But the world was not kind. At the grocery store, she overheard whispers. "She's too old to be a mother. What kind of life will that child have? She's being selfish." Even her own daughter, Emily, who was now in her 30s, struggled to accept the situation. "Mom, this isn't normal," Emily had said, her voice tinged with frustration. "I don't understand why you're doing this." Margaret met her gaze with calm resolve. "Because love doesn't follow rules, Emily, and neither does life." Then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as she sat on a park bench, watching children play, a woman approached her hesitantly. She was in her 40s, her face weary yet kind. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, you're brave." Margaret blinked, caught off guard. The woman continued, "I had my son at 45, and people judged me too. But you're proving that life doesn't stop just because we get older." For the first time in months, Margaret felt seen. As the weeks passed, strangers started reaching out. Women who had been told they were too old for new beginnings. People who had faced judgment for their choices. Messages of encouragement arrived in her mailbox. A young reporter, intrigued by her story, asked to write an article about her. The narrative around her pregnancy slowly began to shift. Emily, still hesitant, started visiting more often. One evening, as she sat across from her mother, she sighed. "Mom, I may not understand this, but I can see how much this means to you." Margaret reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. "Love isn't always easy to understand, Emily, but I hope one day you'll see. This baby is a gift, just like you were to me." As her due date approached, Margaret felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had spent months being shunned, but now a quiet strength had grown within her. She had defied expectations not for approval, but for the love of the child she had yet to meet. But just when she thought she had braved the worst, life had one more test waiting for her. As Margaret entered her final month of pregnancy, her body ached with exhaustion, but her heart held steady. She had faced loneliness, judgment, and fear, but she had also discovered resilience, kindness, and unexpected allies. Then, one evening, as a winter storm howled outside her small home, Margaret felt a sudden, sharp pain. It wasn't like the usual discomfort she had grown accustomed to. It was deeper, more intense. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, breathing heavily. Something was wrong. She reached for her phone and called Emily. "Sweetheart, I think it's time," she whispered. Emily's voice on the other end was different this time, not filled with doubt, but urgency. "I'm on my way, Mom. Hold on." Minutes felt like hours as Margaret sat on the couch, clutching her belly. She whispered soft reassurances to the child inside her. "Just a little longer, my love. You're almost here." By the time Emily arrived, snow was falling thick outside, covering the streets in a quiet, relentless white. The hospital was 15 miles away, and the roads were getting dangerous. "Mom, we have to go now," Emily said, helping her into the car. But as they drove, the storm worsened. Visibility dropped, and the tires skidded against the icy road. Margaret let out a sharp gasp as another contraction hit. Emily's hands trembled on the steering wheel. "Hold on, Mom. Just a little longer." But fate had other plans. A few miles from the hospital, the car came to a sudden halt. A fallen tree blocked the road, heavy with ice and snow. The wind howled around them, rattling the windows. Emily grabbed her phone. No signal. Panic flickered in her eyes. "Mom, what do we do?" Margaret, despite the pain, reached for her daughter's hand. "We trust, and we keep going." Emily's eyes welled up. For the first time in months, she truly saw her mother, not as the woman making an impossible choice, but as someone deeply, unwaveringly strong. Just then, headlights appeared in the distance. A large pickup truck rumbled toward them, stopping just a few feet away. A man in his 50s, wearing a thick winter coat, stepped out. "You folks need help?" he called out. Margaret gasped through the pain. Emily jumped out. "My mom. She's in labor." Without hesitation, the man nodded. "Let's get her to safety." With gentle but firm hands, he helped Margaret into his truck, his wife quickly wrapping her in blankets. "The hospital's too far in this storm," the woman said. "But our cabin is just up the road. We're retired nurses, we can help." Margaret, weak but aware, looked at the couple. Strangers, kind strangers. And in that moment, she understood something profound. Sometimes, family isn't just the people you're born into. It's the ones who show up when you need them the most. As the truck rumbled forward, Emily held her mother's hand, fear and love intertwining in her grip. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm here. I'm with you." Margaret smiled through the pain. That's all I ever needed. But little did they know, the most unexpected moment was yet to come. The cabin was small but warm, with a crackling fireplace casting soft shadows against the wooden walls. The retired nurse, Linda, moved swiftly, preparing towels and hot water while her husband, Jack, helped Margaret onto a makeshift bed near the fire. Emily knelt beside her mother, her face filled with worry. "Mom, I'm here. Just breathe. Okay?" Margaret, drenched in sweat, reached for her daughter's hand. "Emily, no matter what happens, I need you to promise me something." "Don't say that, Mom. You're going to be okay, Emily said, her voice shaking. Margaret smiled weakly. Promise me you'll love this baby, no matter what people say, no matter what happens to me. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She had spent months questioning, resisting, even rejecting this pregnancy. But at this moment, seeing her mother so vulnerable, so determined, something inside her shifted. She squeezed her mother's hand. I promise, Mom. I promise. Then, a piercing cry filled the air. The baby. Linda gently lifted the newborn into her arms, wrapping the tiny body in a thick, warm blanket. It's a girl, she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Margaret, exhausted but overwhelmed with emotion, let out a breath of relief. Emily stared at the small bundle, her heart pounding. A girl, her sister. Jack handed the baby to Margaret, who cradled her against her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. Hello, my love, she whispered. You're finally here. Emily watched, something inside her breaking open. For months she had fought against this, against the idea of her mother being a mother again. But looking at them now, at the pure love in Margaret's tired eyes, she finally understood. This wasn't about age. This wasn't about judgment. This was about love. Then, something unexpected happened. Margaret, still holding her daughter, looked up at Emily. Would you like to hold her? Emily hesitated, but then, slowly, she reached out, her hands trembling as she took the tiny, warm bundle into her arms. And in that moment, everything changed. The storm outside no longer mattered. The voices of judgment from the past faded into silence. All that remained was the weight of a newborn in her arms, the warmth of her mother's love, and the realization that family wasn't defined by rules. It was defined by the love we choose to give. Tears slipped down Emily's cheeks as she held her baby sister close. She looked at Margaret and whispered, "She's perfect." Margaret smiled, exhaustion evident but peace radiating from her. Yes, she is. Outside, the storm began to calm, and as the first light of dawn crept through the window, Emily knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world covered in soft, untouched snow. Inside the cabin, warmth and quiet filled the air. Margaret lay on the bed, cradling her newborn daughter, while Emily sat beside her, still in awe of the little life in her arms. For the first time in months, Margaret felt at peace. The journey had been difficult, full of doubt, judgment, and fear, but now, holding her child, she knew it had all been worth it. Linda smiled as she checked the baby's tiny fingers and toes. "She's strong," she said. "And so are you, Margaret." Margaret chuckled weakly. "Stronger than I ever thought I could be." Jack stoked the fire, glancing at Emily. "We can try to clear the road once the sun is fully up. But for now, just rest. You all deserve it." Emily nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the baby. She still couldn't fully grasp the weight of what had happened. Just yesterday, she had been hesitant, afraid of what this meant for their lives. But now, as she watched her mother with the infant, she realized something profound. This wasn't just about her mother's choice to have a child. It was about life finding a way, love breaking barriers, and second chances appearing in the most unexpected ways. "Mom," Emily said softly, Have you thought of a name for her? Margaret looked down at the baby, her eyes filled with love. I have, she whispered. Hope. Emily felt her breath catch. The name felt right. Margaret turned to her daughter. Because that's what she is, Emily. A reminder that no matter how impossible things seem, there's always hope. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She reached over, placing a gentle hand on the baby's tiny chest. Hope, she repeated. It's perfect. At that moment, something shifted between them. The distance that had grown between mother and daughter over the past months faded, replaced by an unspoken understanding. Emily no longer cared about what people would say. She no longer thought about how unconventional this was. All she saw was love, a mother's love for her child, and now her own love for her baby sister. A few days later, after the roads had cleared, Margaret and Emily returned home with baby Hope. News of the birth had already spread, and to Margaret's surprise, something had changed. Neighbors who once whispered behind her back now knocked on her door, bringing warm meals and small gifts for the baby. Some apologized for their judgment, while others simply smiled and said, "She's beautiful." Even those who had distanced themselves couldn't deny the undeniable power of seeing new life in Margaret's arms. And Emily? She found herself stepping into a new role, not just as a daughter, but as a sister. She held Hope in the early hours of the morning, fed her when Margaret was too tired, and whispered soft lullabies when she cried. The baby who had once been a source of doubt had now become a symbol of healing, of love reborn. One evening, as Margaret rocked Hope to sleep, Emily sat beside her. "Mom," she said, "I was wrong to doubt you." Margaret looked at her daughter with warmth. "No, sweetheart, you just needed time to understand." Emily smiled. "Yeah, but I get it now." She glanced at the sleeping infant. "Hope changed everything." Margaret nodded. "She did. But so did you." Months passed, and Margaret embraced motherhood once again. Though it wasn't easy, she faced each day with gratitude, knowing that her love for Hope would carry them forward. And Emily? She no longer saw her mother as someone who had made an impossible choice. She saw her as someone who had chosen love despite the odds. As for those who had once shunned Margaret, they, too, came to realize something. Life doesn't follow society's rules. Love doesn't have an expiration date. And sometimes the most unexpected things can bring the greatest joy. As Margaret sat on the porch one afternoon, watching Hope sleep in Emily's arms, she felt the warmth of the sun on her skin and the steady beat of life moving forward. And she smiled, because in the end, love had won. And that was all that mattered.